Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by Five Dimes and Countermove. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 65 event, which takes place in Adelaide, Australia. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 3 total bouts. Briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC 186 went 0-6 to lose 6 units overall. We tried an underdog round robin with Shane Campbell, Chris Clements, Jessica Rakosi, and CB Dalloway, and it just didn't work out. We also lost a 1-unit free bet that included Sarah Kaufman and Olivier Aubin-Mercier. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 65 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired exclusively on UFC Fight Pass this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the first fight on the UFC Fight Pass preliminary card is a flyweight matchup between Özkılıç, who is 9-3, and Ben Nguyen, who is 13-5. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I open Özkılıç minus 270, the comeback on Nguyen plus 190, and there has been some movement on this fight. Quite a few fights actually from top to bottom on this card. All lines, by the way, are courtesy of our sponsor, 5dimes.eu, so check those guys out. Right now at 5 Dimes, we have Özkılıç minus 185, the comeback on Nguyen is plus 160, so a little bit more dog action coming in early on at least, and about a 30-cent movement on the dog or so. And this is going to be a very competitive fight. Nguyen is one of those guys that's a bit unknown. Overall, I mean, he's obviously making his UFC debut. He's a well-rounded veteran, but he's a veteran kind of, I'm saying that, at the age of 26. So he's had several fights. He's been around the scene for a while, but still fairly young. So he's one of these guys that has a ton of experience, but still has youth advantage on his side. He's going to continue to get better, especially now that he's making his entrance into the UFC. The guy is a very talented fighter overall. He's an athletic, aggressive fighter on the feet. He mixes his striking up very well, kicks punches, has some power to go along with it, has some speed to go along with his power as well. Even his wrestling game, the guy has decent takedowns. He closes the gap really fast, and he's aggressive with his takedowns as well. So he looks to take the fight to the floor. If it stays standing, the guy's not bad. He's got a little bit of power. Like I said, he's kind of a complete package. Now, that being said, he still needs to fine-tune his game a little bit. He's still a little raw in some areas, and I'm sure he's going to improve that as his career progresses in the UFC. Now, Özkılıç, on the other hand, man, I mean, the guy's a beast, honestly. I mean, he had one heck of a fight, even though he lost to Lineker in his last bout. That was an awesome fight to watch. The guys were going back and forth. He hung in there, took some heavy shots, so he proved that his chin is very solid. Even though he ended up losing by knockout eventually in the third round by TKO, he still proved that he belongs with the upper tier guys at 125, no doubt about it. And to talk about a complete overall game, I mean, Özkılıç, he's not really that well known for his striking, but he's decent on the feet as well. He's got a little bit of power. We could say a lot of things I just said about Nguyen that go for Özkılıç, but I think his resume is a little bit even more impressive because the level of competition he's faced is far better than Nguyen's as well. So Özkılıç has some solid wrestling, has some decent takedown defense to go along with it, has some decent grappling. He's a grinder. And again, from his loss to Lineker, I think he's actually going to take a lot from that. I think he's going to actually have a little bit more confidence knowing that he can compete on that level. I mean, Lineker, he's been on the cusp of the title shot for so long. I mean, his weight issues is what kind of blown it for Lineker, and Özkılıç was right there with him. So I think that this is his fight to really win or lose. I think Özkılıç just a little bit more ahead at this point of his career because of the quality competition level. So I don't think Nguyen is going to really present anything that Özkılıç hasn't seen at this point, if that makes sense. But I do expect a very competitive battle. If it hits a scorecard, it's going to be close, but Özkılıç should win. The majority of the time, he should win by decision in this spot. If there's going to be a finish, it could realistically go either way, because I think Özkılıç is more of a decision type of grinder. type of fighter, so I expect him to win that way. But that being said, I do still think he's going to get the job done here. I don't expect a finish either way in this fight. I think that Özkılıç goes on and it hits the scorecards and he gets the W here. So my official pick is Özkılıç.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree. Özkılıç is the more well-rounded fighter overall. The main thing here with Nguyen is he's a bit more known as the viral sensation as he is an actual really good fighter. We had that crazy video where his opponent was talking some smack at the weigh-ins and then he shut him up during the fight with a quick knockout. That's not going to be something he's going to be easily able to pull off against Özkılıç. Özkılıç is very tough, has a good chin, very athletic, has good wrestling base, and hits really hard. And if you actually go back to Nguyen's losses, his last 4 losses were all knockouts. So if Özkılıç connects with something really heavy, he could definitely put Nguyen out. So that's something you got to keep an eye on. Nguyen is the more technical striker on the feet. I think he does put combinations together better. He has a decent amount of power, and he does do some things really well. He has some good natural instincts in his striking. On the ground, Özkılıç is definitely the better wrestler, but Nguyen is a little bit dangerous in terms of his transitions and sweeps, and he can pull off some submissions, but I don't see him tapping Özkılıç at any point. So overall, Nguyen basically needs to keep this fight at distance, or maybe in the clinch where he can, drop down to some good body shots and some elbows. But I think that Özkılıç is going to be the better overall fighter. He can get some takedowns in this fight, and I don't think Nguyen will be able to reverse them very easily just because Özkılıç is so strong. And at some point in this fight, Özkılıç is probably going to be in top position and winning rounds. So my pick is Özkılıç. I think Nguyen's a great story, but I think the Cinderella story ends for this fight. Now, moving up to the welterweight division, we have Vick Grujic, who is 7-4, taking on Brandon O'Reilly, who is 5-1-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Grujic minus 150, the comeback on O'Reilly plus 110, and right now it's Grujic actually minus 120. The comeback is even money, so line margins tightened up a little bit. There is a little bit more money coming in on O'Reilly, but nothing crazy at this point. It's a tough fight to bet, I think, overall, as far as just placing your bets confidently in a spot like this, because obviously Grujic is a very decent fighter because he's improved his overall game, but he is coming off of a devastating knockout loss to the hands of Clement, so we got to take that in consideration here as well. And he's 38 years old. But that being said, Grujic has taken his game. He's been training at Alliance. We all know that, and it's really improved his game quite a bit. I mean, Alliance is a very solid gym, has a lot of good training partners, and it's going to rub off on you. And I think that Grujic has improved to the point where he's actually not an easy out in the UFC, especially at 170. So he's strong. The guy has some size to go along with it, and he's got skill on the feet. He's not bad. He's got some knockout power, and he continues to push a high pace. And he's usually the aggressive fighter in the cage as well. So O'Reilly, honestly, he hasn't been really that impressive. He's somewhat of a well-rounded fighter as well. He's coming off that decision loss to Li Peng Zhang in his UFC debut. I just, he's going to have to really keep up with Grujic's high pace here. He's going to have to out-wrestle Grujic, I think, in this spot. Maybe try to land a big, heavy bomb to put Grujic out to win this fight. That's not really O'Reilly's style either here. So regardless of where this fight takes place, I think Grujic is going to be in control a little bit. Grujic is going to be the aggressor on the feet, and I think Grujic could actually get top position at times as well here in this spot. So I do think if he hits the scorecards, we might see a competitive fight, but I still lean a little bit more towards Grujic. But my tentativeness is because Grujic is, again, 38 years old. He's coming off a knockout loss as well. O'Reilly is the younger fighter. I think he's going to improve fight by fight as well. But in this case here, and the way he matches up with Grujic, it's really not a good stylistic matchup for him. I think Grujic does come away with the win here. So not confident, but I got to go with Grujic here to get the W.
Neither of these guys are really that good. The biggest difference between them is age. Grujic is 38 to O'Reilly's 27, so 11-year age gap is a big deal. But Brandon O'Reilly is a career 155-pounder. He did not impress on The Ultimate Fighter when he competed, and then in his UFC debut, they signed him, and he lost to the Tough China winner, and that is definitely not something that you want on your record. So Grujic, as unimpressive as he's been overall and being 1-2 in his UFC career, at least the losses, he lost to Nordine Taleb in his UFC debut. and then he lost to Chris Clements by knockout. But, I mean, he does at least have a little bit of skill. I mean, he can go out there. He trains at Alliance. He works with some pretty good people. So I do think that he's the more well-rounded fighter. Grujic has a little bit more power. His chin isn't good, but as Nick mentioned, that's not O'Reilly's game. He's not a big striker. O'Reilly probably wants to drag this fight to the ground and make it ugly. And I think Grujic should be able to keep it standing if he wants. And Grujic is a little bit more well-rounded. And even if it goes to the ground, Grujic could be the guy in top position. So, even though he's 38 years old, I think that this is Grujic's fight to lose, and he could land that knockout blow or at least win a decision here. So my pick is Grujic. Now dropping all the way down to the women's 115-pound class at strawweight, we have Alex Chambers, who is 4-2, taking on Kailin Curran, who is 3-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Curran minus 210, the comeback on Chambers plus 160, and right now the line over 5 dimes has moved a little bit, though, not much. It's minus 190 for Curran, the comeback on Chambers is plus 165, so line margin is basically tied up here as well. Two-way action, nothing crazy going on in this spot either. And I understand it in some ways. I mean, Curran got overwhelmed a little bit. She looked good at times in that fight, her debut against Paige Van Zandt, and we all know how good Van Zandt has looked in that fight, and then obviously her last fight as well. So Van Zandt seems to be a legit contender, possible future contender at least at 115, and Curran was hanging in there early with her, but she just got overwhelmed. So this is not that kind of matchup for Curran. I think that Curran is a very solid fighter, underestimated probably coming into the Van Zandt fight and probably afterwards as well, because she did get overwhelmed a little bit in that fight. But again, she's not going to have to face that kind of overall tenacity that Van Zandt, or the pace that she ended up bringing into this fight as well. So I think that Chambers, in fact, she's a little bit too tentative at times, and that's what usually costs her in some fights. And Curran's not going to be. I think Curran is going to push a very high pace. I think Curran's going to look for some takedowns. I think Curran actually, even though she doesn't have any official submissions on her resume, Curran has a better sub game than indicated. She's training at a good camp with Rain as well, so she has a lot of good things going for her. She's also younger. Chambers is getting up there a little bit in age, but this is one thing that you got to look out for, because Chambers really hasn't showed what she's made of yet. I mean, Chambers is a very solid fighter, better than most people think. I know that her debuts or her UFC fights thus far from the show, and I mean, in her debut, obviously she ended up losing to Daly as well. She got submitted in that one by armbar towards the end of the first round, but still, that wasn't very impressive. But I think the Chambers is better than that. So I think she has a little bit of skill on the feet. If she's just a little bit more aggressive and uses that aggression in her favor, she could do better. She could possibly hang in here with Curran. And then on the ground, of course, again, Chambers isn't that bad, but her submission defense is what you got to watch out for. And it's a little bit suspect for sure. She has been subbed by some pretty good opponents, though. So you got to give her some credit where credit's due. But at age 36, I just don't see a lot of upside for Chambers either. And I do see that for Curran, because again, I think Curran's just a younger, fresher fighter. She's going to be improving more fight by fight. This fight is not on short notice for Curran, in which obviously the Paige Van Zandt fight was. So she's going to want to bounce back here with a little bit more time and prove that she does belong at 115 and potentially could make a run towards that 115 title. Obviously, both of these ladies have a long way to go in that regard, but I do think it's Curran's fight to win or lose, and I expect her to get the W here and get the nod. So my official pick is going to be Curran to get the W.
And I completely agree. I just think Kailin Curran's going to be too much for Alex Chambers. Every time Alex Chambers has stepped up in competition, she has been overwhelmed. She is a natural atom weight fighting at 105, and she's really only fighting at 115 because the UFC doesn't have a 105-pound division. And Kailin Curran is just going to be bigger, stronger. She's going to be the better striker. I think Curran's going to have the better ground game as well. The only thing that concerns me is Curran's conditioning is not the greatest, but against Alex Chambers, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. I can see her overwhelming Chambers quickly and getting a TKO, maybe getting a submission. Chambers has been submitted twice now. She got submitted on the show easily, and then Aisling Daly also tapped her out in her UFC debut. So I really just don't think that Chambers is that good. She's really only in the UFC right now, just throwing it out there, is because she looks pretty and she's Australian. And against somebody like Kailin Curran, I think that she's just not on that same level in terms of pure mixed martial arts talent, and she's not going to catch up to her either because she's 36 years old. So this is absolutely Kailin Curran's fight to lose, and I'm going to pick her. Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Dylan Andrews, who is 17-6 with 1 no contest, taking on Brad Scott, who is 9-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I open Andrews -130, the comeback on Scott -110, so virtually a pick'em. And right now it's staying steady, close to a pick'em with -115 for Scott and -105 for Andrews. So a little bit more action coming in on Scott, but again, it's close to a pick'em, and this line could bounce back and forth as we go and get closer to fight day here. And I understand it. It's definitely a competitive or interesting fight, I should say, because Andrews does have the skill to win this fight, no doubt about it. He's a well-rounded fighter. I think he's a smart fighter. He's got a lot of good things going for him, and one of the key factors in this fight is probably going to be his wrestling. I think that he can get the fight to the floor, possibly. Scott's takedown defense has improved. It's okay overall, but it is also at times a letdown, and that's what kind of got him beat in his last fight. That being said, Andrews has underrated wrestling, and his takedown accuracy is a little bit better than most people would think. Now, on the feet, Andrews does also have some skill. He's got some power to go along with it, too. So wherever the fight goes, I think Andrews is slightly ahead of Scott in some ways. But pure striking, I do give the advantage to Scott because I think Scott's a little bit more battle-tested as far as his chin goes. He's a little bit more durable, the two. I think he has the better pure knockout power as well to go along with it. And I think he mixes up his striking a little bit better. So on the feet, I do give the slight edge to Scott. But of course, again, on the ground, I do give the slight edge to Andrews because I think his wrestling is a little bit better. But it's going to come down to Scott's takedown defense. And as I said a little bit ago, I mean, that's what kind of let Scott down in his last fight. I think he was more than game. He actually almost knocked out his opponent in his last fight against Claudio Da Silva. He ended up actually rocking him early on in that fight. But again, fight IQ came into play a little bit. He was taken down at not the best times, and the judges, it's kind of swayed the judges towards a decision for Claudio in that fight as well. So Scott kind of had that fight. It was his fight to win, and he lost it. So that's a little bit scary. But I do think there's more upside to Scott. Again, he's younger. He's 25 years old. He's constantly improving, and the guy really does have some skill. Andrews, one bad thing about him is you really can't trust him. Obviously, he's been hurt in his last couple fights. That's how the fights have ended, kind of flukishly a little bit as well. I mean, his fight with Sam Alvey, it was his takedown that actually got him in trouble there as well. And then, of course, the fight with Hester was a doctor stoppage because he got injured in that fight as well. So some weird things going on with Andrews, and you can't trust his chin. He's at that age, 35, where I think his body isn't just what he wants it to be. So as far as trust factor goes, I think Scott's the younger, again, fresher fighter. I think he's a little bit more durable at this point, and he's got a way to win this fight, which is actually knocking out Andrews. So if he can avoid being put on his back and just being out-grinded and wrestled for 3 rounds, I think he's going to win this fight. And I think it is going to be tricky for Andrews to do that for him all 3 rounds. So I am going to lean towards Scott. I think he has the capability of ending the fight with Andrews. I think Andrews obviously can another freak accident or situation that he gets into, he might injure himself again. I mean, it's happened 2 times in a row for him, and it could happen again. I wouldn't put it past him. So I trust Scott just a little bit more here. Hopefully his IQ is better than it has been recently, though. That's one, like I said, one flaw in his takedown defense shows up, because if so, Scott's going to win this fight. So I want to say I'm confidently picking Scott, but you never know with these guys for sure. But my pick is officially going to be on Scott.
And I can understand the pick of Scott. He is significantly younger at 25 years old compared to Andrews is 35. And overall, Scott probably is the more dangerous fighter in terms of on the feet with his Muay Thai skills and some pretty good punching power. And he has a little bit of jiu-jitsu. He's able to submit Kuiper in his one UFC win. But overall, Dylan Andrews, in my opinion, is the better wrestler, and that is what this fight could come down to. As you saw in his last fight, Brad Scott had a lot of trouble against Claudio Silva, who was an undersized middleweight on short notice, and Scott just got taken down and worked over and ended up losing a competitive decision. This time around, if Dylan Andrews is able to get Scott to the ground, it could be the same thing, except Andrews is a better wrestler than Silva, and he's bigger, so it could be easier for Andrews. My big question and my big concern with Andrews, of course, as Nick mentioned, is his durability. Dylan Andrews does not have a great chin, so if Scott connects with him solidly, he could knock him out. And Dylan Andrews is very injury prone. He basically busted up his own shoulder against Hester and lost that fight by doctor stoppage. And then against his last one against Sam Alvey, he went for a takedown that got slightly reversed and then knocked himself out. And that's just something that is going to be a concern for 3 straight rounds. Is Dylan Andrews going to be able to go out there and not get hurt? And that's not something I can be super confident with. But the thing I am confident in is the fact that Andrews does have the better wrestling, and at some point in this fight, he's going to be getting some takedowns. So if Scott can keep this fight upright long enough or get back to his feet when taken down, he's got a decent shot at winning this fight. But if not, then Andrews is a really good chance of grinding this out, maybe getting a TKO, maybe getting a submission. So my pick is Dylan Andrews, but I'm not very confident with it. Now dropping down to the women's strawweight division, we have Beck Rawlings, who is 5-4, taking on Lisa Ellis, who is 15-9. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Rawlings minus 260, the comeback on Ellis plus 180, and right now looking at the line over 5 times, it is Rawlings minus 155, the comeback on Ellis is plus 135. So Ellis is getting some respect in this fight. A lot of it, I think, is due to their last showing out there. I mean, Ellis is a wrestler. She's a grinder. That's been her MO for, since the beginning of time. Definitely, that's what her best attribute is. She likes to get the fight to the floor, control the fight, possibly look for some submissions offensively, and win that way as well. So Rawlings had significant trouble in that area against Clark. Clark was able to win that fight mainly by controlling the fight, controlling the ground battle a little bit, and that's how Rawlings lost. So I think a lot of people believe that Ellis can give the same type of fit to Rawlings here. I just don't know. I think Rawlings is a little bit better than she showed against Clark in that fight. She got herself, it was her fight to win or lose, and she lost it, in my opinion. She got herself put in some bad spots. You got to credit Heather Clark for sure. She might be a tad bit underrated, but I also think that's the case with Rawlings here too. Rawlings is well-rounded. I think she is by far the better striker in this matchup. I think she has decent wrestling offensively. She does definitely need to stay off her back and not get grinded out at times for sure, but I think even her sub game is actually legit as well. So Rawlings is a pretty complete fighter, and I've been pretty impressed, especially her output offensively. Now, that being said, Ellis is at the point of her career where she didn't really have a good showing on The Ultimate Fighter. And again, she wasn't overly impressive in her loss to Daly either in her debut, her official debut in the UFC. I think she's at the point in her career where I'm just not sure where her mind is and how much she really wants to be a UFC fighter at this point, or if she's ever going to really take it serious enough to be a contender, where I think Rawlings does have that mindset. I think Rawlings wants to be a future contender. I don't know if she's going to get there, but I think she does have that desire to do so. And I think she is overall the more skilled fighter. Ellis is almost a one-trick pony. She's going to need to control this fight, and I think along the way, even if Ellis is doing good early on, I think Rawlings finds a way to take over this fight and probably finish Ellis along the way as well. If it hits the scorecards, it might be competitive, it might be close, but I still give the slight edge to Rawlings here as well. I think really it's, again, another spot where it's her fight to win or lose. Now, she lost the last one in that situation. Could she lose this one again to Ellis? Maybe so, but I don't think that's going to be the case this time. I expect Rawlings to come out ahead and get the W here as well.
This is definitely Beck Rawlings' fight to lose. The big concern for me here is that this fight, Ellis is taking the fight on short notice, stepping in with about 3 weeks to prepare in place of Seohee Ham, and Lisa Ellis just isn't that great of a fighter. She was pretty good at one point way back in the day, but she is definitely a small strawweight. She has fought at 105 pounds before, and she doesn't really have the frame for 115. She is prone to submissions, so even if Ellis does take this fight to the ground, and I think she definitely could, I can see Beck Rawlings submitting her on the canvas. On the feet, Rawlings is definitely the superior striker, so I think Rawlings lights her up in the stand-up department, and when it does go to the ground, even if Ellis does get the takedowns and she does have some good scrambling ability, I don't know if she can do it for 3 straight rounds. And I think at some point Rawlings could tap her out. She has been putting in a lot of time. Rawlings has with Alliance MMA. She spent her whole camp there in preparation for this fight. So I expect she's going to be more than prepared for Ellis's wrestling. And overall, I just think that Rawlings is the better fighter. And my big concern is, even though Ellis has that skill set and she's a veteran and she's game, I just don't know if her heart's in it, because she at some point puts herself in a bad position and gets tapped out. And that's happened in 3 of her most recent losses. So I can definitely see Lisa Ellis getting tapped out. I can see Lisa Ellis getting beat up on the feet and potentially knocked out. And I could somehow see Lisa Ellis grinding out a decision with her wrestling. But I think that is the least likely of all the possibilities. So overall, I think Beck Rawlings turns it around. She gets that Australian fan base fired up. And I expect Rawlings to win either a decision or a knockout here, probably. Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Dan Kelly, who is 9-0, taking on Sam Alvey, who is 25-6 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I open Alvey minus 290, the comeback on Kelly plus 210, and there has been some movement on this fight. Of course, not that surprising. It is on Alvey. Right now at 5 times, it's minus 400, but looking across the screen, there's still about 360, 370 out there. So Alvey is getting the early support, not a lot of love or respect for Kelly, even though Kelly has had a couple decent performances in the UFC since The Ultimate Fighter for sure. So Kelly, I think, is a little bit better than most people are giving him credit for. But that being said, he's facing a very tough and game fighter in Alvey. So I can understand the love and the support coming in towards Alvey because, I mean, Alvey is definitely one of those fighters that has always been a tad bit underrated throughout his career. Now he's finally getting the fan support and the overall better support I think that he deserves. I mean, we've been a big fan of Sam Alvey. He's won us some money in MMA Oddsbreaker Premium in the past. And I think that honestly, in this fight with Kelly, he matches up relatively well here in this spot as well because Kelly is an aggressive fighter. Of course, he's got this judo background. He's a southpaw. He's got some power on the feet. He has a lot of problems for some fighters that he could pose, but I think for Alvey, I mean, he's faced big, strong fighters in the past as well, guys that like to push forward. Alvey kind of takes his time, picks his shots, and then unloads, and he has, again, underrated knockout power, and he gets the job done in most cases as well. So Alvey's takedown defense and his overall game is fairly solid. Both these guys are southpaws, so that's going to be interesting as well to see how, the stand-up battle kind of unfolds here, but I do favor Alvey in that spot, and I think that Kelly's going to have trouble getting Alvey to the floor. So if it does stay standing, you got to give the edge to Alvey. I think Kelly, again, he's a guy that is aggressive and he likes to push forward, but that leaves a little bit of openings. And for a guy with Alvey's knockout power and his precision striking, I think Alvey can definitely land one and knock Kelly out here as well. Kelly's 37 years old, so age could be a factor here. I'm just not sure how much upside he's got left in the UFC. So I think he's one of these guys that can win a few fights. Obviously, he's proven that in the UFC, but once he steps up to a higher level of competition, like I think Alvey is, according to, Kelly for this fight, he's going to have some problems. So I do think that Alvey gets the job done here, probably knocks Kelly out. If not, even if it's a scorecards again, you got to side with Alvey. I think he's going to be the one landing the cleaner shots. Even if Kelly's a little bit more aggressive, I think Alvey's smart enough. He game plans very well. That's one thing that impresses me about Alvey. He studies his opponents well. He knows their tendencies, and he actually reacts well to those. That's why he gets a lot of his knockout wins. So Alvey has been pretty impressive, and I think he's going to continue his newfound confidence and his momentum here in the UFC and get the job done over Kelly as well. So I am agreeing with most people that have bet Alvey. I think that he is the side, and he should come through with a win here.
And I completely agree. Yeah, Dan Kelly's coming in here with a 9-0 overall record, but that doesn't tell the whole story. The real story is he's 37 years old, which is a concern. Yeah, he's a good judo guy. He made it to the World Championships and the Olympics with Australia. But Sam Alvey's 9 years younger at 28. Sam Alvey is significantly more experienced with almost 20 more fights than Kelly. Actually, more than 20 more fights than Kelly. And Sam Alvey is definitely the more dangerous opponent of the two of these guys. Dan Kelly does have a lot of nice things going for him overall with the judo and just being a gutsy guy, but Sam Alvey hits way harder. I think Sam Alvey trains at a better gym with the Team Quest in Temecula, and Sam Alvey is just the better overall mixed martial artist and has beaten better fighters. I think this is a step down for Alvey after what he just went through against a really tough guy in Cesar Miocic. And if Alvey is able to connect with something heavy, I think Dan Kelly is going to be in a big, big trouble. So Alvey is going to be looking for that knockout blow, as he always does, and in doing so, he usually gives up the parts of rounds, and then once he finally settles in, that's when he makes the fights really good, and he's either able to win a decision or score the knockout. You saw that in that last fight. I mean, Miocic was just doing everything in the fight, and then the second Alvey found an opening, he just cracked him with one good shot and put him away. So we could see Dan Kelly setting the pace early, but at some point Sam Alvey is going to turn it on, and he's either going to knock out Kelly out, or he's going to win the last 2 rounds and win the decision. So my pick is going to be Sam Alvey. I just don't see Daniel Kelly able to impose his will on Alvey like he's been able to do in his first 2 fights. So I expect Sam Alvey to win either by knockout or decision, and it probably will be knockout. So I definitely do like Sam Alvey here. Now dropping down to the welterweight division, we have Kyle Noke, who is 27-1, taking on UFC newcomer Jonavin Webb, who is 8-0 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Webb -130 to come back on Noke, -110, and it's virtually a pick 'em again, and it's flipped. It's -120 now at 5 dimes for Noke, even money for Webb, but again, staying near that pick 'em type of spot. And for a UFC debuter in Webb, I mean, you got to think I gave him a little bit of respect, and out there the betting market has agreed and not really come in that strong on Noke either, because they know that Webb, his attributes in this fight and how he matches up with Noke is actually fairly well. And I believe that. I mean, Webb, let's get in his background. Most of you guys are familiar with Noke, maybe not as familiar with Webb. He's replacing Andres Stahl in this fight, so he's going to have a little bit of a short notice. He's a CFFC welterweight champion. His competition level is actually okay considering it's outside of the UFC. He's got 3 or 4 decent wins on his resume, not bad. He's basically your wrestling, grappling-based fighter. He's an explosive athlete. Good, really what he does best, and that's get takedowns and control the ground game. He closes the distance fast on the feet, basically using his striking to set up his takedowns. He's another one of those type of fighters, and he's still developing his striking. He tends to be a little bit tentative on the feet, which isn't good because I do think the Noke's going to have, obviously, the stand-up game advantage here in this spot, and he's going to have the overall experience edge, and we all know that Noke is a very talented fighter. Surprisingly, honestly, Noke did lose to Cote, and what I'm saying surprisingly is the way he lost was actually getting out-wrestled by Cote. And we all know Cote is more striking-based fighter, not really a wrestler, but he used his wrestling to his advantage in that fight against Noke and was able to control most of that fight. And now in a matchup against Webb, Webb has better wrestling than Cote, so he should realistically be able to get the fight to the floor and control Noke. And again, that's the kind of fighter Webb is. So that's why I opened Webb as a very, very slight favorite near pick'em, and that's why I think it's staying like that as well. That being said, Noke to me is a question mark because if you look at some of his fights on the ground, the guy has been very good. I mean, his submission win, it's been a few years now, but his submission win over Kamosi was pretty impressive, how quick he was able to do that. He also submitted guys like Kimmins, which isn't, I mean, he's not on the UFC roster anymore either, and then of course the knockout of Brenneman fairly quick. Brenneman has a weak chin, but still he has it in him to stop a fight was what I'm trying to say. And on the ground even, he has enough skill to win by submission in a lot of cases. So it's one of those weird situations where when Noke shows up, man, he could be really good. But when he doesn't show up, again, in the Cote fight, honestly, I think it's a spot where he didn't really show up too well. He could get beaten, look kind of bad. So it's all going to come down to wrestling here. It's all going to come down if Webb is able to take this fight to the ground and control him and do what he does best. I think he's going to be able to do that. I think he's going to be able to grind out at least 2 out of 3 rounds here. If he doesn't get himself in trouble, submitted or knocked out on the feet, I think he's probably going to win the fight. And I think it's fair to say that Webb can survive even against a veteran, tough, gritty veteran like Noke. So that's why I'm slightly leaning towards Webb still in this spot. I think he can do what he does best and get the W here with his wrestling.
Webb is making his UFC debut, but he is a guy that has a really solid wrestling base, some really good jiu-jitsu, and while he doesn't have the most experience, I mean, Noke has fought for way longer and has about 20 more fights than him overall. I do think that Webb has the skill set to exploit some of Noke's deficiencies. Noke is a decent ground fighter. He's a good, solid veteran. He's faced the who's who of all the guys in the Australian scene, and then he's had some good experience in the UFC and competing on The Ultimate Fighter, but he's getting up there in age. At 35 years old, he has been fighting about once a year. He didn't even fight at all in 2013, so he's just not getting the type of experience to stay sharp. And I think this is a really good position for Webb to come in here and take advantage of that. especially with that last fight. While Noke had some good performances in his career overall, in his last fight he looked atrocious. Patrick Cote just made a fool out of him with turning into an All-American wrestler and just taking Noke down at will and having no problems with Noke's submission game off of his back. And I think that we could see the exact same thing here. Webb is not much of a stand-up fighter at all, so if this fight stays standing, Noke will have an advantage. But what Webb does do is he works some kicks from the outside, and then he lunges in with some power punches to close the distance and get either a clinch or a power double leg takedown attempt. And he works for the takedown hard from there, and when he does get it, he's a very good at from top position. He can drop some punches, he can get a TKO that way, or he can get a submission, or he can ride out a decision. Webb really doesn't matter as long as he's in top position, and that is something that he's pretty good at. So I expect Webb to be able to close the distance and take this fight to the ground. These guys also, side note, have worked together. Jonavin Webb did come over with Paul Felder, one of his training partners, to Donald Cerrone's gym, which was where Kyle Noke was working when Felder got signed to the UFC. So he has been working with Noke, and then now with Noke's original opponent, Andreas Stahl, dropping out, Webb is stepping in on about a month's notice. So he is familiar with Noke's game, and I don't think Webb would have taken this fight if he didn't think he could win it. And I expect Webb to get the takedowns and stay on top and not get submitted or knocked out. So my pick is Jonavin Webb. Now dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Hatsu Hioki, who is 27-8-2, taking on Daniel Hooker, who is 11-5. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Hioki minus 280. The comeback on Hooker plus 200. Right now at the time of the recording is Hioki minus 280. The comeback is plus 240 on Hooker. There has been some two-way action on this fight. Line bounced back and forth a little bit and has settled back to closer to where I opened it, obviously, at this point. And it's based on, I mean, if you look at it throughout his career, Hioki has been a tremendous fighter. Surprisingly, gets finished by Oliveira in his last fight. And I'm saying surprisingly because that was the first time anybody's been able to finish Hioki, so you got to give all credit to Oliveira, but that tells you how good offensively Oliveira can be. But that being said, I don't expect a guy like Hooker to do the same thing here in this spot. Hooker, of course, in my opinion, in this fight, he's going to want to keep things standing and try to test out Hioki's chin a little bit. Hioki's been around for a long time. Hooker's a little bit younger. I think Hooker is going to want to stand and bang with Hioki a little bit and try to take advantage of what he thinks might be a declining type of fighter in Hioki. Now, that being said, I know Hioki's only 31 years old, but in fight years, he's beyond that for sure. So never been knocked out. The guy's tough as nails and hard to stop. So I don't know if Hooker's going to have too much success there. And also, Hioki's a little bit underrated in the stand-up game. I mean, he's more well-known for his ground game. Again, he has got underrated wrestling, Hioki does. And then his jiu-jitsu offensively is outstanding. I mean, he can submit most. So that's what Hioki's a well-rounded, solid fighter. Been in there with the best in MMA, period, inside and outside of the UFC. The guy's had a tremendous career. So for Hooker, this is going to be a big step up. Now, in his last fight, Hooker was game, of course. But that being said, he did take some punishment from Blanco, no doubt about it. He was eating some punches. Hooker's defense is a little bit suspect, and Hioki could have some success on the feet as well, even though I think that's Hooker's best area to win this fight at, because if Hooker is able to get Hioki on his back, maybe he could drop some bombs, drop some ground and pound on him as well, but Hioki, I think, he's going to have trouble keeping Hioki on the back, and Hioki's pretty slick even off his back with his triangles, with his arm bars, and with his reversals. So it's going to be interesting how this fight plays out, but I think either way, Hioki should at least outpoint Hooker. So this is another decent step up in competition, I think, for Hooker, and I'm not sure he's quite ready for it. Now, as far as the betting line goes, though, it is still difficult to bet Hioki, especially at a price like this. So it could be a dog or pass situation as far as Hooker goes. But that being said, again, I think Hioki's just going to be too much for him too soon. Hooker's still 25 years old. He still has to maybe clean up some of the flaws in his game, including his strike defense. And on the ground, he has been submitted by opponents as well. And Hioki is dangerous as heck if he gets position on the ground. So I think this is going to be a little bit too much for Hooker. But what I have seen in Hooker, not bad. The guy has a ton of heart. He does like to be aggressive, pushes forward. And again, he's a guy that's never going to be, I think, an easy out for anybody in the UFC featherweight division. But that being said, it's Hioki's fight to really win or lose. So I'm picking Hioki.
Hioki, he's just such a solid veteran. I mean, when he got signed to the UFC, he was listed as the number 2 ranked featherweight in the world at the time. And while things have not panned out as many expected in his UFC career. I mean, he has been competitive and been in just about every single fight. And, I mean, you look at some of those losses and they've been crazy close, and they've been against some of the best guys in the division. And Daniel Hooker, he had a really nice UFC debut against Ian Entwistle, and then things just did not work out well for him in that next fight against Blanco. He just got outworked over the course of 3 rounds, just about everywhere. So I think Hioki is definitely a better fighter than Maximo Blanco. Hioki is, in my opinion, one of the best guys, skill-wise overall in the featherweight division. I mean, he's a pretty solid overall striker. He's long. He's got a little bit of power. And then his ground game is unbelievable. I mean, his transitions on the canvas are phenomenal. If Hooker is that intent on taking the fight to the ground and trying to work him over with ground and pound, I think he's going to be in some trouble because Hioki has a very dangerous guard. Hioki can get back to his feet. Hioki can sweep. And when Hioki's on top, you got to watch out. I mean, that guy can transition from anything. Like his mounted triangle is especially dangerous. So I really do think that this is Hioki's fight to lose. Daniel Hooker is a talented guy, but I just don't think he's quite on Hioki's level yet. And while Hioki might be in a bit of a decline at 31 years old, I don't think he's declined enough to the point where a guy that's pretty low on the UFC featherweight totem pole in Daniel Hooker would be able to defeat him. So my pick is going to be Hatsu Hioki. Now, kicking off the main card, also on UFC Fight Pass, is a lightweight contest between Jake Matthews, who is 8-0, and James Vick, who is 7-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Up in Matthews, minus 190, the comeback on Vick, plus 150. And right now, looking over the line at 5 dimes, it has decreased a little bit. It's Matthews minus 165. The comeback on Vick is plus 145. So again, according to the dog, not much movement. It's actually 5 cents drop on Vick, but still a little bit more action coming in on Vick and some balance back towards Matthews as well. So we're going to see some two-way action on this fight because both guys are extremely talented, and both of these guys are young guns that will continue to make some noise at 155 and move up the ladder. Now, it's interesting because they're matched up in this fight, and I think it's an important fight for both fighters' career, especially for Matthews. He's only 20 years old. That's a scary thing here, and Matthews is such a good fighter, a complete fighter overall. I mean, again, he's still developing his skill set. He still possibly have some flaws on the ground. Maybe his sub-defense, as you know, on the show, Mercier was able to get the submission win over him. But outside of the Ultimate Fighter, Matthews has looked amazing, really. I mean, the guy is, again, the total package. His wrestling is really good. His stand-up, he's got some power. He's got some good technique to go along with it. There's not many flaws that you see, again, minus against a good jiu-jitsu fighter that are going to really be able to get to Matthews at this point. And again, I'm going to repeat it. He's only 20 years old. So sky's the limit for this guy, honestly. I think he's going to continue to improve, continue to really open some eyes. And I think Vick, if he get the win over Vick, that's going to be the best win to date of his career. And I think it's a possible win for him. Now, Vick, on the other hand, I'm saying it's going to be the best win if Matthews is able to get it because Vick has fought some very solid competition. And Vick can really present some problems for a lot of people. I mean, he's very long. He's going to have a decent reach advantage in this fight. He's going to be taller, and he's going to have, I believe, about a 4-inch pure reach advantage. So that's going to be something interesting that Matthews is going to have to deal with. And not just that, it's also considering that Vick has decent wrestling in his own right. I mean, he can't obviously be put on his back. I mean, that's been proven before in the past, but he's not easy to take down and control. And then Vick also has some sneaky submissions for a big guy as well. So it's not going to be an easy fight for Matthews regardless of where it takes place. But the problem is for me, Vick has really shown some weakness in his stand-up D. I mean, the guy's been getting rocked. I mean, people were able to get through his defense and wobble him on the feet. Credit to Vick that he's been able to, to stay with it and come back strong and fire back when he does get in some trouble. I mean, against Hine, in that first round, he was in some serious trouble. I mean, that fight could have easily been finished, but Vick managed to survive it, managed to stay in the game, and managed to win the fight. So that tells you a lot for Vick. So Vick is not an easy out by any means. So Matthews is going to be tested here. And I expect a really good back-and-forth fight here. So I'm leaning a little bit towards Matthews because I think skill set for skill set, I think Matthews' defense is a little bit better. I think Matthews has enough power to give Vick problems even on the feet. And I think also Matthews could possibly get a takedown or two along the way. And on the ground, offensively, Matthews has some good ground and pound. His fight IQ is pretty solid, again, for being so young. It's, I think, beyond his years, really. And he's been nothing but impressive. So for me, from what I've seen recently from Vick matching up against Matthews, I think Matthews is actually the better fighter in this matchup. Now, is that going to come into play, or if it's going to work out that way on fight day, we'll have to see. But as of right now, I am leaning a little bit towards Matthews. I think he's going to keep his momentum going in the UFC, and he's going to get a great victory under his cap here against Vick.
Jake Matthews, in my opinion, is the best Australian fighter today. You can name off all the guys that maybe have a little bit more experience, have had a little bit better accomplishments, but Matthews is the guy to keep an eye on. He's only 20 years old. He has a phenomenal base in terms of overall mixed martial arts. He has a really good ground game, improving striking, and he's just that type of fighter that actually could break into the top 15 someday, maybe be a title contender. Who knows? I don't want to go too crazy in terms of speculation on this kid, but I do see him as the absolute best Australian prospect today. Now, James Vick, he's good too. He's long, really long for the division, tall. He's got some dangerous power. He has heavy knees and especially has a really good ground game. So Matthews can't be too over anxious getting this fight to the canvas because he could just walk right into a guillotine choke like Ramsey Nijem did when he was trying to get takedowns against Vick. Now, overall, I do see Matthews as the more well-rounded, better fighter. Matthews does have definitely the better wrestling of the two, so if this fight goes to the ground, I can see Matthews being the one that initiates the takedown. And on the feet, while Vick is long, he is not that technical. As Nick mentioned, Nick Hein was able to find some pretty good success against Vick in the first round before Vick finally was able to adjust. And I don't think he'll be able to adjust nearly as well against Matthews because Matthews is very explosive on the feet. While he still is a developing striker, you saw that in the fight against Wagner Roca, and he blasted Roca with a really nice Superman punch that hurt him, and then he was able to fall him to the canvas and actually choke Roca unconscious, which is super impressive to me because Roca was, a world-class Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist. And Matthews is that type of fighter that just doesn't care about your credentials. He'll just go right at you. And that's not a bad fight IQ thing. That's just a confidence thing. This kid is very dangerous, very young, very talented, and I think the sky's the limit with him. Now, Vick does have the potential to pull this out. He does have a little bit more seasoning, even though Matthews has fought once more. Like Vick competed on The Ultimate Fighter, did very well, and he does train at a decent gym. And I do feel that the size could be a factor here, just because he is longer and taller. It's going to be a little tougher for Matthews to hit him on the feet, although that could make it easier for Matthews to get a takedown. But if this fight stays standing, Vick could adjust and end up winning a decision. But I think Matthews is going to be really intent on getting this fight to the canvas. And at just 20 years old, I think who knows how much better he's gotten since that last fight against Roca. So especially fighting in his native country of Australia, I think Matthews is going to be super fired up, and he's going to come out here and take care of business. So I see Jake Matthews walking away with a decision victory, or maybe even a TKO at some point. Now moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have Anthony Perosh, who is 15-8, taking on Sean O'Connell, who is 16-6. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened O'Connell minus 150, the back on Perosh plus 110, and right now looking over the line at 5 dimes, it is the other way. It's Perosh minus 155, O'Connell's plus 135. So yes, more action has come in on Perosh, the hometown guy, the veteran, and the UFC. The guy's had several fights in the UFC, and it's actually performed fairly well, better than expectations in most cases. So action has come in that way. I'm a little bit surprised. I mean, it's just, for me, it's hard to, I guess, at times make Perosh a favorite. His skill set's definitely good. I mean, what he's known for is obviously his jiu-jitsu skill. The guy is tremendous on the ground. And again, his age, though, 42, that bothers me a little bit. His chin, he's been knocked out 5 times. That bothers me a little bit as well. But on the feet, Perosh's hands aren't bad either. So, I mean, he's got decent technical skill on the feet. And, of course, on the ground, again, he's a BJJ whiz. So that's his huge advantage there. But in a guy like O'Connell, I honestly think it's a tough matchup because O'Connell has some solid wrestling overall. Not bad. Obviously, the jiu-jitsu jiu-jitsu edge is going to go to Perosh in that fight, but O'Connell's not necessarily terrible on the ground. But he can be subbed especially against a guy like Perosh for sure. But I think if O'Connell keeps it upright, he's got enough knockout power and he's aggressive enough to find Perosh's chin as well. So that's why it's kind of hard to open up a 42-year-old as a favorite, especially been knocked out 5 times. But then again, this is a very competitive fight. It could go back and forth, and both guys have ways to win this fight. For me personally, I'm going to lean towards O'Connell a little bit more. I do think he should be a slight favorite in this fight based on, again, not skill set, because skill set for skill set, I think Perosh is a little bit more technical and he's a better overall fighter, but I think O'Connell is a little bit younger. He's going to have a little bit of speed. I think he's going to have a little bit, I guess, more ways or more killer instinct to finish the fight on the feet, especially. And I think Perosh, if he underestimates him at all, he's going to probably get caught knocked out again. So I think O'Connell hung in there pretty good against Villante. That's going to give him a little bit of confidence going into this fight again. There's more of an upside for the UFC in this spot for O'Connell as well. So everything kind of leans for me a little bit more towards O'Connell, and I think he's probably going to knock Perosh out. If it hits the scorecards, I'm sure it's going to be a very competitive coin flip type of decision. And if it hits the ground, I'm sure Perosh is going to probably sub him. So tough one, but I do think that O'Connell, it's his fight to win or lose if he fights smart and keeps it upright.
And it's a very winnable fight for O'Connell, but it's also a winnable fight for Perosh. Neither guy is a top-tier light heavyweight. Both guys have flaws. O'Connell is one of those jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none type guys where he's a decent striker, he's decent on the ground, he's okay with his defensive wrestling, but he's not great at anything. He's a pretty good brawler, and if he can force Perosh to brawl with him, he's going to win this fight. If he can't, Perosh could be able to dictate the fight. And Perosh is definitely more of a push forward, maybe land a couple shots on the feet, but what he really wants to do is drag this fight to the ground and get top position. Even from bottom, he's not that good. I mean, Ryan Bader beat the crap out of him from top when he was on top of Perosh. So Perosh absolutely needs to get on top and make something happen. And usually if he can get the fight to the ground, he does. So if he can put O'Connell on his back, he could win this fight by submission. He could win it by decision. He could get a TKO. O'Connell doesn't have a great chin either, and Perosh does have some power. So either way, if it all depends on which fighter can dictate their own style. And I have a feeling that Perosh, even though the crowd's actually going to be behind him and the betting odds are behind him, I think he can actually live up to it. At 42 years old, he might be able to drag O'Connell to the canvas. I'm not happy about Perosh being favored so much, but I do think that he is a very good chance that he could pull this off. But again, 42 years old, it's tough to trust. But my pick is going to be Perosh. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, the numbers are in clear agreement with both of you. Perosh's ground stats are aggressive. He goes after takedowns pretty much immediately, doesn't really try to stand and bang with people, although he does have actual knockdowns to his credit. He has knocked people out before. But Sean O'Connell's striking stats are just better, probably going to be much more resilient given that he's more than 10 years junior. So this is just going to be a position battle. Who gets it? If it's standing, it's O'Connell's fight. If it's on the mat, clearly Perosh has an advantage. O'Connell's been submitted a couple times. So this is one that's kind of a coin flip because it really depends on where it goes. And I would almost just wait to see who's ends up as the underdog and go that way. It is interesting to note, though, that Anthony Perosh has never been a favorite ever in his UFC career. And yet his last 8 fights since coming back to the UFC, he had 2 way back in the day. But his 8 fights, he's gone 5-3. So this is a guy who, from a statistical standpoint, has overperformed his expectation. He has won well above what he was supposed to win. So, maybe with the hometown and a smarter game plan, he gets this to the ground. I don't see this going the distance. One of these guys could get tired and then he becomes prey to the other one because of the stylistic mismatch. But yeah, this is kind of a toss-up for me because of how clearly one guy has an advantage in the other over the other in a particular spot. So I'm waiting to see someone get a finish, and really it wouldn't surprise me either way which guy it is. All
right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, dropping down to the middleweight division, we have Brad Tavares, who is 13-4, taking on Robert Whittaker, who is 14-4. Now, Nick, What's the MMA odds makers' perspective on this one?
Up in Tavares, minus 245. The comeback on Whittaker, plus 175. And since that time, more action again on the dog. It's now minus 160 for Tavares, plus 140 for Whittaker at 5 dimes. So more action coming in on Whittaker. I mean, let's face it, the guy Whittaker has looked great. A lot of people countered him out in his fight against Hester because he moved back up to 185, of course. So they thought, hey, he's going to be too small. A guy like Hester is going to be stronger. He's, Whittaker has been clipped and stunned in his fights. Obviously, Thompson knocked him out as well. So there was a lot of disrespect, I think, shown in that Hester fight. But that being said, he's getting it all back after that W. I mean, that was impressive. A great fight back and forth with Hester and Whittaker for sure. And I think it raised Whittaker's stock. People really believe that. I mean, this guy's a talented striker. He's got good takedown defense. He's really a well-rounded fighter, complete. And at 185, he did look a little bit healthier. He doesn't look small for the division. I mean, the guy has a lot of power to go along with it. But this is going to be another test for him. Tavares is a very strong fighter. I think at 185, he's finally coming into his own. He's fought some very talented fighters. I mean, he was able to survive against a guy like Ramiro. He ended up getting knocked out the fight after that against Tim Bosch. That was a surprise because fight he was dominating, and then he did bounce back finally in his last fight against Mark Hort and got a little bit of respect back. But that being said, right now it looks like Whittaker is getting respect from the betting public more so than Tavares. They trust him a little bit more. I don't know. For me, I'm leaning a little bit more towards Tavares in this spot because I think he is going to be the physically bigger, stronger guy. He's more of a grinder. He works very hard throughout the fight. In the entire 3 rounds, he's going to be pushing forward, pushing a high pace. And Whittaker does tend to slow down, especially in rounds 2 and round 3. But Whittaker is going to be the more dangerous striker here. So I could see Whittaker maybe catching Tavares and knocking him out because Tavares has been caught before. Again, I just mentioned the Tim Bosch loss. He's been rocked in fights as well. And I think pure punching power and pure skill as far as boxing goes, you got to give a slight edge to Whittaker. But don't underestimate Tavares' hands either. You guys have been working very hard, and he's got a little bit underrated power to go along with it as well. But I just think for a complete fight, if Tavares does not get caught and knocked out, I think he should win it if it's a scorecards. I think he does have an outside shot as well to knock Whittaker out. Tavares, again, not really known for his knockout power, but Whittaker has been clipped, has been rocked, has been put out, so I wouldn't be surprised if Tavares knocks him out, but I do think ultimately it probably hits the scorecards. We're going to see a very competitive fight back and forth, and I think if that's the case, Tavares should win the decision more times than not. This is definitely a good fight for both guys, looking forward to it, but I'm slightly leaning more towards Tavares at this point.
Brad Tavares is the more well-rounded fighter. He is definitely one of those guys that is right on that fringe in the top 15 in the division. He can beat some of those guys. Sometimes he'll lose. His biggest flaw has been his chin. Tavares does not have that great ability to take punishment, and there are some pretty heavy hitters in the middleweight division. Now, against somebody like Whittaker, that is a little dangerous, because even though Whittaker fought at welterweight for most of his career, he moved up to middleweight in his last fight and knocked out Clint Hester. That's an impressive victory, and that was a slugfest. And maybe that's the type of fight that Whittaker needs to have to beat Tavares, because in terms of technique, I do think Tavares is the better overall fighter. Tavares has a really nice jab. He works really well in the clinch. He puts a lot of pressure on his opponents. He mixes things up with punches and kicks very well. It's a lot better than what Whittaker does. Whittaker is a bit more of a guy that sits on a big strike and tries to land that. So against Tavares, Whittaker's definitely going to have to turn this into a knockout, drag-out brawl. And if he does, he could win that fight. Neither guy has a great chin, but Whittaker does have much more one-punch power. So in a stand-up fight, I favor Tavares, but you always have to worry about the threat from Whittaker. And on the ground, I think Tavares is a little bit better. You really haven't seen much on the canvas from Whittaker other than defensively, where he would keep his hands real low against a guy like Colton Smith and then got the knockout after stuffing some takedowns. So Tavares is definitely the better overall fighter. I am worried about that chin. I mean, as Nick mentioned, Tavares was lighting up Tim Boach, and then all it took was one little punch from Boach, and it just put him out. So if Whittaker connects with something solid, Tavares will definitely go down. And while Whittaker doesn't have a very good chin in his own right, Tavares' only knockout in his MMA career, his UFC career at least, was against a faded, gassed Phil Baroni early in his career. And even then, he took some damage in doing so. So I'm favoring Tavares. He probably wins this fight by decision, but you got to watch out for that Whittaker knockout. It could come at any moment. So my pick is Brad Tavares. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I think they're in agreement here. I wish I could see more of Robert Whittaker, to be honest, because on paper it seems like he's the more technical striker. He's very accurate. He's got a lot of knockdowns to his credit, and he's reasonably hard to hit. But he has been dropped twice, as you guys pointed out. Tavares probably the more vulnerable. His defense is way worse. He has been dropped more times and higher on a per punch basis. So standing going toe to toe, it's Whittaker with the greater one punch knockout power. But Tavares, who is used to working at a high pace and just out hustling people, and that's why he gets those close decisions. But he is vulnerable that whole time. So I do see potential for Whittaker to get that upset KO. But you're absolutely right. If it goes to the cards, Tavares seems to be the better hustler. He's more likely to mix in some takedowns, even though he hasn't been overly successful on the ground. He's certainly more going to use his wrestling more than Whittaker, who has almost not used it at all, but also has some good takedown defense of his own. So this is kind of a really back and forth numerical matchup. It's one where, taking the odds angles, maybe you want to pick more specific paths. I mean, I don't think either of these guys is going to submit the other. If they stay standing, Whittaker certainly has a potential for the knockout upset, which could be good value as a prop, but Tavares is good at grinding guys, and if it does go to the cards, maybe it swings his way. So I see this as fairly even. I might see some value on an upset, but more likely to be specific to a knockout, because otherwise I don't think he gets it. I agree with you. Tavares probably more well-rounded, more paths to victory, since he would likely get round-to-round scores just on activity, but his hands are just not as sharp as Whittaker's, or at least not on paper. So there's some risk there because of Tavares' chin.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now this brings us to the main event of the evening. We have a heavyweight matchup between Stipe Miocic, who is 12-2, and recent title challenger Mark Hunt, who is 10-9-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Stipe minus 160, the comeback on Hunt plus 120, and right now at the time of the recording, it has been bet up. It's now Stipe minus 225, the comeback on Hunt plus 185. So more action coming in on the favorites. Really not surprised. Again, it's another situation where you got the younger, fresher fighter in Stipe Miocic at age 32 versus Hunt. He's been around for a long time, especially through his K1 career, into MMA in Japan, and now, of course, finally making his way into the UFC. And what an incredible run the guy's had. So phenomenal. But that being said, he's 41 years old. His last fight against Verdum was, at times it was impressive because he was winning that fight early on, no doubt. And that was for obviously the interim heavyweight title. So that's amazing in its own right, to be honest with you, that Hunt made his way to an interim title fight for the UFC, especially given his overall career record at around 10 wins, 9 losses or so. But it's all about work ethic, and Hunt has put the work in to get himself better. His main deficiency was definitely on the ground. I mean, the guy, you could basically take him down back in the day, at least pretty easy. Then you could murder the guy like nothing. But he's been working, of course, with American Top Team. He's been surrounding himself with good training partners, and he's overcome a lot. And what he's known for, obviously, is that knockout power. I mean, the guy's a tremendous striker. He can knock anybody out in the heavyweight division. I firmly believe that. I think anybody across the board. I mean, even against a guy like Kane, I wouldn't be surprised at all if a guy, Mark Hunt landed something and knocked even the champion out. I don't think that would happen because I think obviously Kane would beat him. But that being said, Hunt has that much knockout power and that much capability of getting the fighters out of there. But overall, I think Stipe is the better fighter in this spot. I think, even though he's not maybe a better pure striker, I think he mixes things up better these days than Hunt. He's got a little bit more speed. I think Stipe is pretty fun to watch on the feet as well. He's not really known for his knockout power, sort of say, but he mixes his boxing up well. I think he's got some good knees from the clinch, which could come in handy here as well. I think he's going to have a huge reach advantage over Hunt. So if he uses the clinch well, I think that could be very effective for him. He also has a wrestling advantage in this fight as well. So I think Stipe is the more complete fighter. I think that Stipe is a little bit underrated in the power department as well. I think he could possibly get an aging Mark Hunt out of there, and maybe a little bit of surprise to some people, but I think that Stipe can win this fight by knockout. I think if it hits a scorecard, it's going to be close because both these guys have a tendency to fade as the fight goes on, but it'll be a competitive battle. But I think if it does end up hitting the scorecards, Stipe can win that way as well. So really it's Stipe's fight to win or lose. I think he has more pure advantages in this fight. If he doesn't get clipped and knocked out, he's going to win this fight, either by finish himself or, like I said, even possibilities of if it does hit the scorecard. So I understand the early action coming in. I mean, it's always hard to lay that kind of juice against a pure knockout puncher like Hunt, but a lot of people are coming in that way, and I do think that Stipe is going to win, so they're probably on the right track.
And I completely understand why Stipe is the favorite here. He is the younger fighter. He's the more athletic fighter. He is the more well-rounded fighter. So, and against a guy like Mark Hunt, you have to be a little more concerned about the amount of damage he's taken in his career. I mean, he was a guy that was known for how incredible his chin was. I mean, it was unbelievable when he was first entering the UFC, but now he's been knocked out or dropped in just about every one of his recent fights. So that is something you really have to take into consideration. Mark Hunt does have a really good striking background, being that former K1 champ. He's not just that guy that's just going to stand in the middle of the cage and spam an overhand right like Roy Nelson. He has a more intricate striking style. His defense is not bad. He has some pretty slight head movement that takes advantage of opponents when they're telegraphing their shots. He can step inside quickly with lunging strikes. He has good uppercuts. He has pretty powerful leg kicks for a short, stocky guy. And, I mean, you have to respect the power. I mean, the guy puts everything he has into some of those strikes, and if he can connect with a good right hook or something, you're in big trouble, even a guy like Stipe. So Miocic is going to have to be careful. He's going to have to not telegraph his strikes. He's going to have to not telegraph his takedown attempts, because he definitely did against Junior Dos Santos. And I think it wouldn't be a bad idea for Miocic to push this fight into the clinch a lot like he did against Dos Santos and land those strikes on the exit like he did against Dos Santos. So there are definite opportunities for Miocic to land some big strikes. I just think he's going to have to be careful in open space, because Mark Hunt is very dangerous when he's in that center of that cage. Even though he got knocked out from that flying knee by Verdum in his last fight for the interim title, he was winning the first 7 minutes against Verdum. Now, in terms of cardio, neither guy is a cardio machine, especially Hunt, but they both have gone 5 rounds before, so I do slightly favor Miocic, although it's a bit concerning. He's flying all the way over to Australia, although I think he did go there 2 weeks early to make sure his body was completely prepared for this type of fight in Australia, different time zone and everything. So, all in all, I'm favoring Miocic, but you have to respect the power of Mark Hunt, and he is never out of a fight. So, I'm picking Stipe, but not crazy confident in it, especially now that the odds are climbing a little bit. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, these are heavyweights, and Mark Hunt is involved in the fight, so obviously anything could happen. But I agree with you. I think the numbers do lean towards Miocic. He is rangy. Remember, for a heavyweight, he's got long range. Even though he's lighter than most guys, he has an 80-inch reach. Mark Hunt is very short-ranged, and now that he's over 40 years old, people talk about how tough he is and he can take a punch, but listen, his career has been pretty brutal, and he has taken a lot of hits over the years. His chin rating is now the worst on this entire card on a per-punch basis. He's been dropped 4 times. Again, obviously tough as nails, but that's just not the type of punishment you want to be dishing on a 41-year-old guy against someone who's younger, longer, leaner, and who can put up a higher pace like Miocic can. Now, Stipe also has his wrestling to fall back on if he can utilize it. And Brian, as you mentioned, if maybe he uses the clinch to try to neutralize Hunt early on, wear him down a little bit, take him into deeper water. Neither one of these guys are going to put in barn burners for 5 rounds. They're going to tire, but you got to favor the conditioning of Miocic over Hunt here. They'll both be dangerous. So I just think there's enough factors here that lean towards Miocic for one way or the other. I mean, he could get a finish too, because again, the chin rating on Hunt is on the decline, and Stipe's striking is quite accurate. They have almost identically accurate striking, even though they have very different backgrounds, and Stipe does it at a higher pace. So I think he's the fight with Junior Dos Santos was a real test. even though he lost, I think I came away more impressed with him because he went toe to toe with one of the best strikers in the heavyweight division ever. So I have got to go with Stipe. I really think that he's improved his game and he keeps getting better and better. And this is going to be a huge win for him if he pulls it off. Obviously Hunt is going to be dangerous early, but I think Stipe survives the early storm and he takes it further and he eventually gets it done one way or the other.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 65. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday night following the weigh-ins. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMA Oddsbreaker Premium member. If you'd like to become a premium member, you can sign up at the top right corner of the MMAOddsbreaker.com homepage. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsors, 5 Dimes and Countermove. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.